Hi, bonjour everyone. We're just waiting for a few minutes so that everyone can log in.
Hello.
Hi to everyone logging in. We're just waiting a few minutes for everyone to join us. We'll wait one more minute and we'll get started. Okay, I see more logging in, so we're going to get started. So thank you for being with us today here. My name is Sally. I work on the Investment Readiness Program at the Canadian Women's Foundation. And we're really excited to have you with us today for this capacity building webinar, which is presented to you by the Canadian Women's Foundation, the Investment Readiness Program, the Demonstrating Value, and Vancouver City Community Foundation. And as you all know, it's on tracking and expressing your success and visually demonstrating value. Before we get started, I just wanted to make sure that you have access to interpretation if needed. So the presentation will be in English. However, there is French interpretation available. So you can look at the bottom on the right to select the language. Donc, vite en français pour ceux et celles qui ont besoin de l'interprétation. Vous pouvez regarder en bas à droite, il y a un bouton pour que vous puissiez sélectionner le français. Et la présentation se déroulera en anglais, mais vous avez accès à l'interprétation. Et les groupes de discussion se dérouleront en français et en anglais, donc vous n'aurez pas besoin d'interprétation. And just a quick note that when you come back from breakout groups, which will be in English and in French, so you'll be put in the group with the language that you selected when you registered. But when you come back, if you are using French interpretation, you just need to select back the French option. I did mention the same thing in French just right now. So before we get started, we think it's really important to do a line acknowledgement. So the Canadian Women's Foundation and the organizations we support do take place on traditional First Nations, Métis, and Inuit territories. And we're really grateful for the opportunity to meet and work on this land. We want to recognize that land acknowledgements are not enough. And in all that we do, we should make sure that we're pursuing truth, reconciliation, decolonization, and an allyship in an ongoing effort to make right with all our relations. So today I am joining you from the unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation in Ottawa. And feel free to introduce yourself in the chat box and the land that you live and work on. Oh, sorry, moved too quickly. So today's webinar is recorded and the recording will be available on our YouTube channel. We'll also be sending you the link. You're welcome, if you have any questions, to write in the chat box. You can also write in the Q&A box. We'll be taking questions for our speakers today. If we don't have time to get to all the questions, we'll loop back to you, or we'll try to address them at the next session, which is next week on November 12th. If you haven't signed up for it, we invite you to. This is a 2-part series, and we really encourage you to attend both. If there are technical issues, which nowadays happen a lot with all our online meetings, we'll do our best to resolve them from the back end as quickly as possible. You can message one of us. We have a few team members with us today from the foundation. We have myself, we have Alina, Michelle, Karen, Segal. So thank you everyone for your support, and everyone will be there to support you as participants. So finally, at the end of the webinar, there will be a survey available. So we would really appreciate if you give us feedback, especially because we have a second session next week, and we'd like to make sure that we can capture any feedback that you might have. So now I'm going to introduce our amazing facilitators and speakers today. So we have Kathy, who's joining us with a lot of experience supporting different social economy organizations for over 25 years. She is a seasoned facilitator, presenter, and adult educator, and she's offered workshops and webinars relating to social enterprise, organization learning, evaluation, nonprofit sustainability, and collaboration. And she's also one of the evaluators of the investment readiness program at the foundation, working really closely with us and many of our grantees. We also have Garth, who's joining us as a communication business strategist, focused on understanding how to manage information to serve the public good. He's a managing director for Junction Canada and leads Junction service development, internal systems and operations, and specializes in strategic management and impact evaluation for mission-driven organizations. So we'll have a lot of insights for you and support your organization grow. So I will pass the mic to Garth and Kathy, who will be facilitating the workshop today.
Thanks so much, Sally, and hello to all of our participants today from across Canada. It's wonderful to see you all. I'd like to acknowledge today that I'm in Toronto, and that's the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa and the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat people, which is now also home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. Our thanks to the Canadian Women's Foundation for hosting this workshop series on impact measurement, and to ESDC and the Common approach for funding demonstrating value to deliver it. In addition to our team from the Canadian Women's Foundation, as Sally said, I'm here today with my colleague, Garth. He's in Kitchener. He's a social business consultant and board member of Demonstrating Value. He's here in a support role, helping to monitor the chat area, debrief the poll results with me, step in to further explain points or answer your questions as needed. And if we have time, take some time to do a quick tour of the Demonstrating Value resources. Also online is Karen Gell in BC, a member of the Demonstrating Value team, who will be presenting additional workshops and doing follow-up coaching. There she is, she's just popped up. We're a diverse group on this call today, and I'm very happy to know that. There are program coordinators, executive directors, board members, fund developers, and consultants, several of whom are attending with other colleagues and team members. Here's what you've told us you'd like to get out of the workshop. You've said you want to understand your organization's value. You want to find more and new efficient ways to collect data, including the design of very specific tools. You want to discover how to use your data, the data you're already collecting, for good decision making, to improve your impact, your fundraising, and policy change. You want to learn better ways to communicate your story to funders and other stakeholders. You also want to share information with your peers, learn about best practices in impact measurement, and some of you would like to be inspired. Well, imagine this. Imagine having information at your fingertips so that the next time you're faced with an operational issue, a need to decide on key strategic directions, a need to develop a funding application or report, or to show what you do in an engaging way, that you can easily pull up the relevant information, make a splash with your images and your data. That's what demonstrating value is all about. We all know what a challenge it is to keep track of data and use it well to further our work. The demonstrating value framework that we'll look at in these sessions provides a simple, practical, and highly visual approach to address these challenges. One that is aligned with the common approach to impact measurement, an emerging flexible standard in Canada. We hope you'll find some of your objectives met over the 2 demonstrating value workshops today and next Thursday, November 12th at the same time. Please note that this is an introductory session that can get you started working with the framework. If you should want more support, you can contact Demonstrating Value for more information and follow-up. And the links and emails are provided throughout this workshop and on the last slide today. Let's have a look at what we'd like to accomplish today with the next slide. We're aiming to introduce you to the framework and tools to systematically look at components of effective measurement. Let's see that slide come up if we can. To understand your information needs and collection options, and to show how you can piece together data for insights into what you're doing to make good decisions and demonstrate impact and value to others. And this is a preview on the next slide of what we'll cover in the next workshop. We'll introduce you to more tools and resources so you can figure out what data is most important to collect and how you might prioritize that data collection. And design snapshots to demonstrate your impact and value to others. So that's the next slide. Gar? Okay, here we go. But before we look at our agenda, I think we're a little off, but anyway, I think before we look at our agenda, let's introduce the first poll. Is Michelle there to introduce the poll?
Yeah, sorry, I didn't have a slide for the workshop 2 agenda.
That's odd. It must have gone missing. No problem. We'd like to know how experienced you feel you are with the tools and approaches for measuring and communicating impact. So please take a minute to fill that in. We won't look at the results for a moment. While we do look for them or wait for them, we're going to pull up our slide on our agenda, which is here. We're going to start by looking at why we measure, why it's important to measure. Next, we're going to look at our demonstrating value framework, the components of effective measurement, and the common foundations principles. We'll then consider how you might plan for your information needs, and we'll end with an overview of several other aspects of the Common Approach initiative. Okay, do we have any results for this poll as yet?
Yeah, lots coming in.
Okay, are we ready to show?
We're seeing a nice sort of bell curve of most people in the slightly experienced category and tapering off to sort of a few at each end of not at all or moderately.
Okay.
But it looks like a good chunk of people here. This is not their very first time thinking about this or engaging in something to do with the evaluation and measurement.
Right. Okay. And some of you may be modest and saying you're not extremely experienced, but there's experience in the room, and hopefully with that variety of experience, we can have some good peer sharing in our breakout rooms. So thank you for that. All right, so the next slide. Why do we actually measure? I'm certain most of us have felt this way about data collection, this first picture.
There it is.
Yeah, we are swamped. We are swamped with information. We don't always get the data we need or want. We're required to report on funding using multiple databases, or we collect information within a program that's not shared across program or aggregated with other like-minded organizations to tell us about our collective impact. We're spending a lot of time measuring and reporting our reports, and our reports often get shelved. There's a point when it's challenging to keep all of what we know in our heads. We get overwhelmed. But this shows, after we need to find efficiencies, that we also need and want good information to support our journey. We need to look before we leap, to have a sense of what we're leaping into, though we won't always know and can't know everything. When something works, we want to replicate it, maybe scale it. We also want to know how to spot a failure and fix it. Thirdly, we want to understand impact. We're all guided by a vision of a just world, a better world, of a positive social and environmental change. We want to understand what works and what doesn't, and how we're making a difference, both individually and collectively. With too few resources and multiple levels of partners, funders, clients, community members to engage and communicate with, we need to be intentional, effective, and efficient in the way we collect data and use it. Demonstrating value resulted from a research project in BC in 2006 to 2008 that engaged both social enterprise operators and their investors. Through an in-depth process, they developed a framework and a series of guides, resources, and templates that have been updated and are showcased on their new website. The link is included on this slide. Some of the activities in these guides will be featured and applied in these webinars. The collaboration, which resulted in the creation of Demonstrating Value Nonprofit Society, aimed to find a common and accessible approach to collecting and reporting on information for both the social purpose enterprise and their investors. Fundamentally, the Demonstrating Value framework is based on the premise that the info you most need to gather must be directly relevant to the decisions you make and be compelling for others to learn about your value. To do this, you must first clearly define your information needs. But also, secondly, you need the capacity to collect information that's useful. And thirdly, to put that information to the best possible use. As we prepare to go to the next slide, let's pull up poll number 2. At this point, we'd like to know which component of effective membership interests you the most. Is it clearly defining your information needs, developing your capacity to collect information, or growing your capacity to use that information? We'll come back to the results in a minute. On the next slide, we want to talk to you about how the Demonstrating Value framework fits with the common approach to impact measurement.
I'm going to put in just a note of color commentary here on these 3 key capacities of impact measurement. Seeing the poll results come in here where actually fairly even, more people on capacity to collect information and capacity to use than on the first category, but there's a good spread there. And honestly, it's hard to choose just one. All 3 are valuable because having a strong foundation in all 3 of those gives you a strong position to assert to potential funders or stakeholders who want information from you what is reasonable within your capacity to do. Otherwise, it's easy to be sort of pushed around by requests from people for information if you don't have a clear grounding to say, yes, we can collect that, or no, that would be very time consuming and costly to collect. And if you want us to do that, you would have to fund us to collect that information.
Great point, Garth. And here's the result then. So yeah, a lot of that capacity to collect. We will talk a little bit more about that next week, and we will be considering in our breakout group a little bit about how and where you'll collect information. And of course, through the workshops, we will look at your capacity to use that information. Okay, let's go to the next slide. As I said, the demonstrating value fits in with the common approach to impact measurement. And within that common approach, there are foundational principles for impact measurement based on effective practice. Those are planning your intended change, that is thinking about the change you hope to bring about with your program, project, or intervention, in which domains you're expecting to see change, and who your intended beneficiaries are. This might be outlined in a logic model or theory of change or similar kind of document. In this case, it might be a demonstrating value snapshot. Using the performance measures. This is about using more than outputs to tell your story. Performance is about outcomes and impacts, using the indicators that are most effective to illustrate the most valuable changes linked to your work. You want to show how you're moving the needle on the change you want to create. Collecting useful information, and we can't emphasize this enough, I think you know this already, but we've acknowledged that far too often, lots of data is collected or we collect the wrong data. It may be needed for admin purposes or funding requirements, but it isn't necessarily serving the purpose of making an impact argument or bringing insight, and this is very important to me, bringing insight into your impact work. We've all seen demographic data collection, for instance, about ages and genders of participants that isn't necessarily linked to impact. Gauging performance and impact, that's connecting the dots between performance findings and the larger mission or impact you're trying to make. Regularly checking the information to help you with your decision making and moving your work forward. And finally, reporting on results, communicating the information you've collected both internally and externally, not just to your funders, but also to others within your organization in effective ways that increase your learning as well as your accountability. Having heard all this, you may feel that this is all very common sense, and that's great. That means you're already integrating many of the common foundations principles into your work. Next slide. What demonstrating value provides is a framework, guides, and resources to reinforce and help you consistently apply the common foundations essential practices. I think we've looked at the results for poll 2, haven't we? So we can just move forward to the next slide. In a moment, we'll be looking at how we can develop a clear picture of your information needs. While we'll show some examples of how snapshots evolve today, we'll spend more time in workshop 2 discussing how to use the information you collect and also how to strengthen and prioritize your data collection as well as your reporting.
So in the comments, we've just had the question come up.
Yeah.
Perfect segue. It says, how do we narrow down which metrics are the most important to our organization and funders?
Well, that's
what a segue. That's exactly what we address in the next section, which is how do you understand what information needs are out there among to your own organization, to your funders, to the people you serve, to other community members. There are a great number of audiences who may want to know some things in common between each other, and some may have very distinct information needs. And that's the first challenge that we take on, is how do we reconcile all of these different competing demands from different people who want different levels of information from us.
Right. Okay. Well, let's forge on then. While we may think that asking questions is easy, the key is asking the right questions. Having a clear picture of what information you need, that is what you want to know, is the most important starting place for guiding the data you collect and how you ultimately use it. So here's Einstein saying if he had an hour to solve a problem and his life depended on it, he'd spend the first 55 minutes determining the right questions to ask. Now, I've always been told I ask too many questions, but I'm a firm believer in this formula that Einstein has put out, which is the more we get clearer about our questions, the more we can produce the kind of information that will be helpful to us. So in determining the information that's most useful to collect, It's a big task, of course it is, but it can be simplified by considering this simple question. What do you want to know and show? And when I say that, I don't mean just your funders. I mean a collective you, a you that we'll go over in terms of some audiences that further takes your work further in different ways. In other words, what do you want to know that would assist your organization, program, or collaborative to manage well and plan better? What are the things that you want to show to others about the value and impact of your organization? 2 additional questions can help you figure out what to measure. What information is useful, and how will the information be used? Demonstrating value identifies 3 perspectives for determining what info is most useful. First is a community impact lens. What information can tell you about the ability of your organization to successfully fulfill your mission to achieve your social, cultural, or environmental objectives? Secondly, a business performance or operational lens. What information can tell you about the success of your organization from a business perspective? An organizational sustainability lens is third. What information can help you understand whether you're developing and maintaining resources to meet your purpose in the long run? That is, do you have what it takes to continue delivering on your social and business goals well into the future? When considering how your information will be used, think about these 3 perspectives. An operational perspective. That is, the information you need to support day-to-day decisions by management and staff. For instance, what can help you stay on top of costs, quality, and delivery of your mission? Or a strategic perspective. That is, what information you need to support strategic decisions that are often made by your board. This information must educate your audience and about key trends and events that have occurred and insights into where you're headed. An engagement and accountability perspective would ask, what information do you need to foster and maintain support for your organization? This one we're most familiar with, aren't we? Because this is what we're asked for so often in our funding proposals and in our reporting back. This includes the support of investors, community members, employees, beneficiaries. Some may have very limited knowledge of who you are and what you're trying to accomplish. So the data that you present may need context and interpretation. Here's an example of an, sorry, go ahead, Garth.
Yeah, I was going to add in, because we saw in the, this is leading into the question of what data should we collect. And there were a couple of comments where people said collecting data is easy when it's tangible things you can count, service interactions, workshops delivered, measurable, observable outputs, but it's more challenging around collecting more subjective or qualitative data like personal impacts or the subjective effectiveness of one type of intervention versus another. And the what do you want to know and show questions can help pull us back from I would say an implicit bias in a lot of measurement and evaluation work to be very numbers and quantitative and counting things focused. So if you try answering these questions, a way to shift your thinking about it is to think, what are the statements that we would like to be able to make and feel confident in our assertion? An example that I can draw on from Vancouver is Brave Technology Co-op. They're a social venture, a cooperative that they help reverse opioid overdoses. They save lives. But the direct causal link between reversing an overdose and that person going on living, they may go on to then overdose again the next day. What happens to that person once an overdose is reversed and they go into the care of emergency responders or not, or what happens afterwards, is largely out of their control. So they have to rely on, to an extent, anecdotal or saying we believe we save lives. There's a lot of different ways that they can tell that story with qualitative data, with just emphasizing the importance of a life that is not just trying to express something in terms of this number of things that we count to talk about that impact. And it might show up in a number of different areas of this sort of two lenses framework.
Thanks, Garth. And I think you'll see in a couple of the snapshots we show how people have addressed that issue of not only quantitative but qualitative information and how it can be captured in very creative ways. Here's an example, in fact, of an early simple snapshot of one social purpose organization, that's Dreamwriter Productions, that worked with Demonstrating Value to figure out what they wanted to know and show. Dreamwriter is a grassroots women-led nonprofit focused on environmental education and behavior change with kids, their families, and their teachers. They started as live theater, but they want to deepen and broaden their impact, so they created Planet Protector Academy, a unique digital-led classroom-based program in which kids become apprentice planet protectors and go home on superhero missions to change their families' behaviors. As they began working with Demonstrating Value, they asked themselves two very simple but key impact questions and value questions. Are kids learning about environmental values? Are they developing and acting on these values? And do teachers see us as valuable educationally? This small snapshot shows how early on they were able to use children's drawings that came with fan mail from teachers that depicted kids learning about environmental values, along with the data collected from teacher surveys and children's self-reporting as evidence of their impact and value. So you'll see in the next click of the slide, you'll see some of those too. Today, Dreamwriters is a social enterprise with a sophisticated business model and an advanced product, selling not only theater productions, but also curriculum based on superhero stories that is digitally enabled. The data collection that they focused on so clearly is now built right into their online platform through game tracking. Their primary customers are now municipalities who share their environmental impact commitments and enable Dreamwriters to do their work within the school system. Check out their website when you get a chance to see how they document and show their impact today. Here's another slightly more advanced example from the Edible Garden project of North Shore Neighborhood House. We'll take a little tour of their snapshot. This also is a woman-led project that was a response to Vancouver Coastal Health Scan's food security activities on the North Shore that identified a gap in access to fresh local produce. Their snapshot is like a puzzle. It communicates an overall impact story, demonstrating what they want to know and show in order to grow their stakeholder support and impact. It speaks to different aspects of value that the organizations deem to be important to their key stakeholders. In other words, it addresses core information needs, their core information need question, what do you want to know and show, in a very intentional and planful way. When we focus in on parts of the snapshot, this one, for example, we see one of their value propositions right up front. The data shows that the farm could be self-sustaining within 5 years of 2011. Well, we can assume from this that behind the data is a progress goal for which they're monitoring data on a regular basis to check their assumptions and make good business decisions. This kind of data can be important for keeping board members on side and for compelling, and very compelling, obviously, for social investors to invest. It also documents some key outputs that show the reach of the activities, including environmental and social indicators, again, of interest to communities they serve and to funders and partners whose mandates they share. And more value proposition information on the next slide. Zero cost to maintain green space, generation of local dollars, and the fact that 90% of the food is delivered locally and directly, a positive impact related to reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. And it goes on. Next, they demonstrate the what for, a statement of rationale, and the fit with consumer demand, with research and statistical data to back this up. This information might typically be in a theory of change or perhaps buried in a feasibility study. Here, it's designed in a 2-page document for a particular audience, pulled out and depicted simply and visually, along with quantified data from credible reports visual images of the farm, and narratives of volunteers and what they get out of the project. While a snapshot like this one might change focus over the years, the information depicted will likely continue to be collected after the fundraising goal is met to facilitate ongoing decision-making about business targets. For instance, how the facilities are used and by whom, as well as how that usage contributes to financial, social, environmental, and cultural goals. Ultimately, much of the data it features will continue to be useful in determining and showing the impact of the project on foundational issues of food security, reduction of CO2, and community development. Another preliminary snapshot, not a slapshot, a snapshot for an organization type that may be familiar to most of us, a farmer's market, in this case, specifically Comox Valley Farmers Market. When asked what they wanted to know and show, the market folks said they wanted to know if they were matching customer needs to available supply to support local farmers in marketing, and whether the market builds community, two indicators related to their very most core objectives: to support local farmers in marketing their produce, to provide community access to fresh local food, and to contribute to social capital in Comox and in the area. Key here is that they want to dig a little deeper into whether customers were finding all they needed at the market, such that they would regularly attend and spend, and how that might be tied to whether vendors valued the opportunity enough to regularly be in attendance. Matching those indicators meant that the market could monitor the relationship over time, enabling them to make business decisions and adjust their marketing strategies as needed.
I helped develop this one and a project for the entire BC Association of Farmers Markets. And it filled in a gap in the development of farmers markets in the province, where by and large, they had been started by sometimes by collectives of farmers, other times by the like recreation departments of some local municipalities. And they sort of thought of farmers markets as being like a cultural amenity, like a street festival. But many different groups didn't have a clear sense of identity and purpose as a market, and how they should serve both vendors and customers, and what are the things that those two different audiences want. What do they each want to know about the market? What does the municipality want to know about farmers markets? And there were a lot of initially wrong assumptions around what people wanted most, or what they thought the value of farmers markets really were. And it was an excellent process to use the snapshot, this little summary of here's what a farmer's market does. It was an amazing conversation starter to go and just sort of put something down on the table between you and a farmer or a mayor and council or a potential customer or funder, and just have there in a nice sort of one-page format, here's some interesting talking points that just give us a bunch of avenues into conversation about the value of farmers markets.
Thanks, Gar. Now we'd like to give you a chance to consider your own context. Take a minute while we set up our breakout rooms to think about the key question: what do you want to know and show? This could be for a priority program that you're seeking funding for, or for a new initiative that you'd like to have approval from the board for, or for a community collaboration where you need to contribute data that would help show the collective impact you're making on a particular issue. But be specific. Think about who will use the info and how it'll be used. One way to start is to write down a couple impact goals for the aspect of the work that you're considering, then turn those into questions. For example, if one goal is to engage women facing employment barriers in meaningful work opportunities, then what you might want to know and show could include this question: is the work you're engaging women in helping them to move beyond survival mode to greater stability and independence, to sustainable livelihoods? So now we're going to go to the next slide and talk about the breakout rooms. You'll have 20 minutes. There'll be breakout rooms of 3 to 4 people. And because there are so many on the call today, we probably won't have a huge amount of time for plenary. But please feel free when you return to use the chat area to comment on what you noticed in the process of thinking through the exercise. And we'll monitor those entries and come back to them after the second breakout session. Also, a reminder that there's simple step-by-step worksheets on applying the framework in the Demonstrating Value guidebooks that you can refer to after the workshop and use with your own teams. So don't worry about scribbling down too many notes because a lot of this is in the workbooks. Okay, so I think we're ready for the breakout rooms. Think about what some of your information needs are and how you might collect that data. We are running out of time, so we will be moving a little faster in this last portion.
You let me know when you're ready to talk about defining indicators.
Yeah, I'm just watching folks come on side here.
Oh, yeah, here's all our numbers coming back into the room.
Yeah. As people are coming back in, and given the time that we are running out of, to be honest, if you want to take a minute to enter into the chat room, any observations you had as we move forward, that would be really helpful. In workshops like this, we don't have a huge amount of time to do the kind of reflection that I really love, and I'm very sorry for that. But I'm hoping that within the chat room you can note something, even a few words or something that occurred to you as you were doing that exercise that we can consider and perhaps come back to in the next workshop, or we can maybe catch up at the end with it. We're going to move on to the next slide now and talk about indicators, everyone's favorite topic, I'm sure. We want to think about what you'd like to show specifically about each goal. That's the indicators that you would look for in order to answer your key questions of what you want to know and show. So we're going to recall the example of the farmers market here and how they wanted to monitor several indicators that would provide more insight into whether they were matching customers with needs, customers' needs to supply. They came up with these indicators: the number of vendors, but not just the numbers. We always think about the numbers. Those are sort of the outputs. There's the number of vendors, but also the percentage of vendors who came to the market on a regular basis, and then the average amount that customers spent, and the percentage of customers that indicated they could reliably find what they were looking for at the market. With this information, the market committee could do some planning and make decisions about how to effectively engage very specific vendors and influence them in the products that they brought to market, while also marketing to the community in particular ways, resulting in a win-win-win, or what we might call a shared value proposition for the vendors, the customers, and the market as an enterprise. Let's talk a little bit more about what indicators might look like. Useful indicators for this exercise are those that can be easily interpreted or understood by those you want to reach. They're reasonable to gather. As Garth said, they're not unreasonable to gather. They're ones you can actually pull together with the resources and time you have. They represent both qualities of the change you're trying to affect, as well as how much change you can show. So the balance between quality and quantifiable things and qualitative evidence is really important. They're indicators that provide insight into where you want to go. And this is really key too. This really struck me within the Demonstrating Value framework, that we're not just looking back, which often program evaluation does, but we're looking forward to where you're headed, where you want to go, where the work that you're doing suggests that you might land in the future. Indicators that can be compared, such as your budget year over year, that's something we're more familiar with, but also benchmarks with others in the field in like-minded organizations. And of course, indicators that are precise enough to be meaningful. You can also look to evidence and research that's collected by others. And we were just talking about this at the break, not just within your organization, in order to tell a story about how what you do relates to what others who do similar work have been showing as evidence or effective practice. So we used to use a lot of information, for instance, from social planning councils, from United Way reports, things that would suggest these issues are here and this may be, or actually research that's proven a particular method actually works. If you do this, you might expect these things might happen.
And I'll add to that. It can take time to make the relationships, but there is a gap between what happens in academia and what happens sort of on the front line in social enterprise or nonprofit work, and building relationships.
I think we've frozen on Garth, so I'm sorry, Garth, I'm going to continue on to make this one point because we are really running short of time. Can people hear me? Is there anyone who can give me a heads up or a thumbs up that you can hear?
I can hear you.
Okay, all right, here we go. I do want to say that there's some really, really great work that's been done within particular social sectors on common indicators. And this I've used a lot with my clients in sectors like supported employment, local food, affordable housing, green economy. And these are documented in research or indicator banks. The Demonstrating Value website has an indicator library for measuring impact, sustainability, and performance. So please do visit their website because you can use some of those indicators if they relate to the field that you're in. Also, the Outcomes Indicators Project in the US, a joint project of the Urban Institute and the Center for What Works, provides outcome indicators for a large variety of sectors such as youth mentoring, performing arts, assisted living, and emergency shelter. These are not just pulled out of a hat, these indicators. These indicators are based on the collective work of people in those sectors over many years, and some of them are verified and validated as indicators. We'd like to give you a chance to think a little bit more with your peers about indicators. We won't have as much time as we hoped for, but I would like to pull up the next slide if we could. I'm not sure if Garth, we've lost him, in which case we might have to pass. Yeah, here we go. Okay, for this exercise, we'd like you to pick one information need, just one, and focus in. Along with your peers, take a very quick moment to brainstorm a list of indicators. Make sure each of the participants has at least a chance to do one of these through. We're going to give less than 15 minutes for this because of our time. We'll give you 10 minutes, but because it's a brainstorm, just let it flow. And we'll see you in 10 minutes. And we'll ask Michelle to put folks in those breakout rooms now. Pick an information.
I imagine I cut off right in the middle of saying it's a good idea to make relationships with your local university.
Yes, that's a good one. We didn't hear that, so if you want to make that point very quickly, I talked about the indicator banks, and with the local universities, I've used them a lot for literature reviews. And it's fantastic. I mean, getting a PhD or a master's candidate doing a lit review is unbelievable.
Well, I mean, more often than not, I feel like they feel like they're sort of crying out in the wilderness, and that nobody knows or wants to hear what their research is showing.
Yeah, it's a wonderful connect to the community.
Yeah, and increasingly some universities are organizing hubs to facilitate those connections. So
yeah, we've worked with the University of Guelph a lot, as well as Trent around that.
Yeah, and like in London, they have the Poverty Research Center that got launched through King's, I think.
Wonderful.
Yeah, there's lots of.
For those who are coming back, Garth, you want to just mention that?
Oh yeah, sorry, I got cut off. I had a power failure at my house. Bizarre. I was saying it's worth the while to over time make connections with your local universities and colleges where there are researchers doing work in the impact area relevant to your organization. So back to you, Kathy.
Yeah, okay. I think we'll get going. We have very little time left, and I'm obliged really to talk about the common approach as a funder of this particular workshop. We'd like to finish off with a bit on that, and also encourage you to come back next time so we can work with you, perhaps to design some of your snapshots and think about how to prioritize the data, the indicators that you might have come up with in your breakout rooms to present a picture of who you are, what you're doing, and to various different audiences. We'd like to, when we talk about common approach, we mean the possibility of developing shared flexible standards and approaches within the social purpose sector to create a shared language so there's a better chance of talking across our differences and within specific sectors about what's working, what isn't, and what might help us generate better and more meaningful community impact. So even in this call, we've had people who are in networks, people who are doing frontline work in farmers markets and girls empowerment groups. And we need some place to talk a language of social purpose. And that's what Common Approach is about. Key here is that the standard is created and for and governed by social purpose organizations. The ownership remains with the community where the work is being done and shared with other investors, funders, and policymakers to partner for positive change. Too often our data is held by our funders and our government supporters and not within our organizations or our sectors. This initiative came out of work done in Ontario as part of the previous government's social enterprise strategy. Carleton University, led by Kate Ruff, and CEDNet, the Canadian CED network, are managing and moving forward on pieces of the common approach. Next slide. Earlier, I mentioned the common foundations for impact measurement. That's that set of principles for our essential practices for measuring impact that are reflected in the Demonstrating Value guidebooks. But the foundations are only one aspect of the common approach. Here are the others. Common impact data standards. They're an organization system for your impact data. It's providing a place for everything, so everything has its place. It makes it easier to share and aggregate data, and softwares can be more easily be designed to support better impact analysis. Already with the Common Impact Data Standard, it's being embedded in several other social impact softwares, and we'll talk a little bit more about that next week. Secondly, the common form is a way of simplifying funding and investing applications by asking the right questions. You're all asked the same demographic information across every single application that you fill in, and this would be an established standard for organizational information. That means it can be entered once and once alone and shared across funders, investors, researchers, and government, as well as groups that are working towards common goals. This aspect of common approach is almost 50% complete, so you may be seeing some progress on this fairly soon. Finally, it's the common framework. It's a flexible framework that will allow groups of organizations to aggregate their own indicators according to other well-recognized frameworks, such as the 17 Social Development Goals, SDGs, and the Canadian Index of Well-Being. This element of common approach focuses on what to measure. This part is expected to take a really long time because it's very complicated. You can visit the Common Approach website to learn more about it. For more resources on impact measurement, check out the Social Enterprise Institute's introductory videos and online training program. Here are the links in this slide. And if you feel like it, take your own self-assessment to see to what extent you're implementing the essential practices of impact measurement. The survey link is on the next slide. That's for the common foundations. There it is. Finally, we've come to the end of our first workshop in the series. Please don't forget to join us next week for part 2. A link to survey feedback will be sent after the November 12th session. If there's anything you want to share with us now in the chat area about what worked and what didn't, or what you learned, or any issues and insights you've had from today, please feel free to use the chat area. That's an important feedback process for us, and the chat area is available for you right now. If you have any questions of things that you're still not clear about, You can use that chat area and we'll monitor it. And with the last couple of minutes, we may be able to answer a couple of questions. So please do that. And don't forget to visit the Demonstrating Value website, which covers all of what we've addressed today and so much more. Let's see if there's anything coming up in the chat area.
Not right away.
Not right away. Okay, so no questions on what you've been doing today. That may be a good thing. We do want to thank you for participating today. We'll be hosting a few more of these types of workshops in the next few months, some specifically for social businesses and others for nonprofits and nonprofit social enterprises. So if you think of others who might be interested, or you want more members of your team to hear what you've heard today and you'd like them to hear it live, Canadian Women's Foundation is kindly offered to list these events in their newsletter. I'll ask them to put the link in the chat area right now so that you'll know how to sign up for their newsletter. So we'll just monitor for the next minute or so. Any questions, comments, if you want to take your mic, open up your mic and talk to us, please do. There are a few of you left, so we could take a few questions or comments or reactions to the work that you've done today. Anyone? Yes, it could have been a full day. This workshop, just responding to the chat area, was actually designed initially as a full day workshop where you get to workshop with your colleagues most of these questions that were and exercises, but it's impossible